Let's move on to the most fundamental part of the training. So we're going to take a look at the different quality criteria that we're going to apply to individual requirements and to the specification as a whole. So let's go for it. And let's start with the quality criteria for individual requirements. The first one, and today we're not going to get into the detail into each one of them independently, even though each one is a chapter in itself, right? So the first thing, a requirement must be clear. And this is sometimes very complicated to achieve. A clear means that it has to be a concise sentence. Therefore, the templates are going to help in that. Also, it means that we have to convey one idea in a way that people are going to understand. And when writing a complex idea and rereading it, we will find out that sometimes it's not that clear, it's convoluted, and it's okay if we rewrite it multiple times until we get to a very concise sentence. And again, writing concise sentences might take a long time. So invest as much time as you need in writing a requirement that is very clear, and always challenge your requirement by saying, is this the best that I can do? The second one, requirements have to be atomic, meaning that they have to convey one single idea per requirement. Ways in which we can identify non-atomic requirements: when we use, first of all, ands and ors. So the system shall do this and this and this. That typically means that we are including multiple requirements in one single sentence. So what are we going to do? My recommendation, try to split that requirement into two, having one of them the first part of the and another requirement the second part of the and. So, for instance, the system shall support creating and deleting users. So you might think that that's one requirement, but what we're really doing is that we're being lazy, because those are two separate requirements with separate tests. So we should phrase it: the user shall be able to create new users, and the user shall be able to delete existing users. There are exceptions here. And the exception might be when we're talking about ranges. So for instance, if we have something like the gauge will give the user the remaining time, the remaining battery between 0 and 100. So that's what it is. It's a range. We cannot separate it. That does not mean that every single range or there are no ranges that cannot be separated, but just pay attention to that, and be careful with ands and ors. Be careful with bullet points. So bullet points sometimes conceal multiple requirements. That doesn't mean that we cannot use them. If, for instance, we have a requirement that says that the combo box shall have all the states in the US, and we list them, that's fine. That is one single requirement. But in some cases, we're just putting all the actions that need to be done, and each one of them is a separate requirement. The third one, and before that, a quick reminder that you can post your comments and questions in the chat window. So feel free to do that if you have questions. The third one, non-ambiguous. Non-ambiguous means that everybody understands the same when reading the requirement. So if we have ambiguous terms, like for instance, quick, secure, greater, smaller, bigger, all those terms can be interpreted in multiple different ways. What is secure? What is easy to use? There is no defined criteria, especially we cannot create a test case and make sure that it will fulfill it 100%. So try to avoid ambiguous terms as much as possible. Usually it's very easy to identify them and it's very hard to fix them. So yeah, we all know that easy to use is very ambiguous, should be avoided, but how do we fix it? So I have two recommendations for you today. First of all, ask and consult. Well, the first thing, you are not going to be able to fix it. That's one of the things that we have to realize. Or the user that sent us the requirement might not be able to fix it either. So what you're going to do is that you're going to consult with experts and you're going to ask them for advice. You ask a UX expert, hey, we have this app on Android and we're thinking on doing it for iOS as well. What usability guidelines should we use? And they'll say, hey, there's a trillion, but actually one of them has been defined for organization. You can download it from SharePoint and it's there. Solved. And neither the stakeholder or you knew about it. So the experts will give you a reference or where to go. Fourth, verifiable. Verifiable means that we will be able to establish a test that will determine whether the requirement is passed or not. If we cannot do this, then the acceptance of the project is random. The customer might accept it or might not. So there are two reasons, or actually three reasons why requirements cannot be verified. The first one is because we're using ambiguous terms. So we're stating that the requirement is it has to be easy to use or quick. So quick is 5 minutes, or is it 5 milliseconds, or somewhere in between? Well, we cannot write a test for that before we actually resolve that ambiguity. But there are two other reasons. So in the first one, we just have to talk to the stakeholder, the experts, and figure out what the actual requirement is. But we might have a requirement that is perfectly well written, like the system shall operate for 2 years without a crash of this type. We might not be able to define a test case because it's either too expensive or it's simply not possible. So in that case, we're going to do several things. We're going to either reformulate the requirement in a way that can be verified, or we're going to create analysis methods to verify that requirement. Like, for instance, if the requirement cannot fail for 2 years, then obviously we have to set up an analysis that puts 100 machines working for a month. And then out of that, we will extract statistics that will help us verify it with the customer. And the customer has to accept those verification activities as well. Let's go for the next 5 quality criteria for requirements. It has to be necessary. Necessary means that it comes from a legitimate source and stakeholder. So therefore, we cannot ask anybody. Otherwise, we'll have requirements that are not traced to sources of requirements. And also, we have to make sure that we take into account tolerances, that we're not saying that the system shall go or shall have a performance of 5 milliseconds, when actually we can ask ourselves, is this really necessary, 5 milliseconds? I mean, for a user interface, the standard is between 1 and 3 seconds. So 5 milliseconds is an overkill. So take into account the cost of every requirement. The next one is design independent. That means that we have to make sure that requirements, as stated, represent what we expect from the system that we're describing from a black box perspective. For instance, if we are developing a new system, the requirements will be the system, whatever it is, will do this and will do that. We're not describing how. The how is described when we go a level down in the abstraction. And then we write requirements for a subcomponent. And in that case, we're writing the requirements from the subcomponent from a black box perspective. So this small component, this software will do this and will do that. And that's the how for the higher level. And if we're describing how to do it, what we're going to see is that it's very difficult to implement different solutions, and we're just geared towards one. So try to be solution agnostic. The seventh is that it's feasible. And when we say feasible, it means within your capacity of technical aspects. So the technology is there and you have access to it, that it's feasible within the time frame and the estimation that we've had, and the cost. If it's not going to be possible, then it's not a requirement. It's wishful thinking. And the last two, complete and correct. Complete means that the requirement follows a template completely. So we have a subject, a predicate, a verb. So something that is less than a template is going to be useless. And last of all, correct. It means that when whatever we're stating in the requirement reflects reality in an appropriate manner. So when the user said 50 miles per hour, that it's truly 50 miles per hour. It's not 500 kilometers per hour. So it's very simple. You cannot verify this. You have to ask the stakeholder and just review all the numerical parameters. So all the parameters, just go through them. Is this correct? Yes, 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 yes. That's the best way of solving that.